friends. Welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I am Mr. Forrest. Thank you for joining us this week. I have a conversation with Daniel Pinchbeck. Daniel's someone I met a very long time ago, around 2006 or so. We talk about that. It's back when I was in New York and getting into some of these different scenes with Evolver and ayahuasca. It was sort of like the beginnings of East Forest and I was meeting new people and going to different events, and Dan was one of the folks that I met. He's an author of multiple books. He's got a great Substack that I mentioned at the beginning, but he wrote Breaking Open the Head and Quetzalcoatl Returns, among others. And he, I think it's safe to say he self-describes, or we both sort of self-described as galaxy brains. Like, he's a generalist. He knows a lot about a lot of different things and likes to have a wide range of research and readings on all these things. And so all sorts of things, from counterculture to the occult to paranormal to psychedelics to these things. And I bounce around asking questions. My apologies at the beginning. I was a little thrown and it took me a second to find that rhythm, but we found it. And Daniel mentions as we get into this, he's like, you're catching me at a particularly sort of angry time. He feels very deeply about the ecological crisis. And I guess I want to say thanks for just being honest and, being where you're at and joining the conversation. But we get into some fun stuff, and I think you're going to definitely find it interesting. A little bit of housekeeping. Just want to say I'm at Esalen right now when this comes out, but I'll be in Japan September 30th into the beginning of October with some dates, as well as in Los Angeles for a release event for my Music for the Deck of the Titanic album. That's on November 7th in LA, and Marieme's going to be joining me for that show. So I can't wait to be doing another sort of joint show with someone where she can merge her incredible vocals with some music. And then Radha and I will be back at Esalen doing our retreat in December 15th through 18th, Big Sur, California. All that information is at eastforest.org. And the Patreon, we call it the Council, is just such a great way to support this. Patreon.com/eastforest. That is the place to, if you want to support the project in any way, that's a very approachable and simple way to do it. And I get to offer demos in our monthly Zoom council and other things that I don't get to release elsewhere. I get to do it there. I just put up, for instance, it'll be coming out soon, the complete recording of my performance at the Ram Dass retreat, which I improvised a lot of that, and some really magical stuff came out, including me playing with new samples of Ram Dass I haven't used before up to that point. So that's a place like, yeah, I don't know where to share some of these things, and that is a place where I get to share things that can't really find a home anywhere else. So it's a very special spot. Thank you to that community. Thank you to all of you who are part of the council. Patreon.com/eastforest. Otherwise, I hope y'all are keeping your head on straight and your heart open, and you're navigating all of these dynamic times with as much grace as we can. For now, let's just dive into this conversation and open up our ears, open up our minds with Daniel Pinchbeck. Exercise it from our bones. I appreciate you talking. It's I've been reading your Substack for a while now. I love it.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I have to give you credit. There's two things that take me way back where you're largely responsible. So I like to say I can blame you for part of my journey since then, which is, one, I read Breaking Open the Head, was probably like the first, book I read as I started to be introduced when I was in New York to some of these different ideas and counterculture. And I read that, which I loved. And at the very end of it, you had an address for reality sandwich in it. And that led me to the retreat in 2008, which led me to getting introduced to Southern Utah, which eventually I ended up moving there. And that's how I met my partner, Marissa, who I call Radha, who you know. And it's been many little happenings since then. And Breaking Open the Head was somehow like my gateway drug. So thanks.
No, that's really wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, it's crazy how those things happen, right? Like the small things that lead to these unfolding of our lives, and it's almost maddening sometimes how like a book or something, and then the little pieces that start to fractalate out from there. But
Where were you living before Utah?
well, it was New York where we met, and in like 2007 or six, I think we started hanging out in similar circles, and then I went to Portland for a good stint, and then I made my way to Utah. So it's basically like bigger circles getting smaller and smaller, more and more away from like the whole New York experience.
That's good. We can talk about it another time offline. But yeah, there's Ron and Brandy and that whole crazy world. Yeah.
Yes, yes, the maelstrom. We could definitely talk about that offline. Well, good, man. So because I've been a bit more familiar with what the ideas you've been swimming in because of the Substack, and so much of it is stuff that I've also been thinking about and resonating with. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk and to get into some of these subjects. And if you're okay with it, I'd love to kind of like, this might be like different things we're talking about, but I know you're interested in all of them.
Sure, whatever you want.
Sure. So, I was thinking back to that time in 2008, we were moving up to 2012, and it was sort of a precious time because a lot of us felt a lot of excitement and all these new ideas and sort of whatever you want to call it, the New Age movement at that time. But everything from aliens to psychedelics to this sort of finding the others in community felt so like new and innocent in a way. And as we moved through 2012 and into sort of through COVID and everything that we're in now with this like quote unquote psychedelic renaissance and where we find ourselves, I think about some of the things you wrote about in the 2012 book, and obviously a lot of people were probably thinking, maybe this could be a real moment and a lot could happen, almost like Y2K, like there was going to be this moment. I was actually down at the ranch in 2012 playing a ceremony like that night on the solstice. But honestly, looking back over the last 13 or 11 years since then, it feels like it is happening. Like this is a time of intense transformation and collapse and apocalypse and unveiling. And yet it's flipping a lot of things on its head. You think about almost like political parties crossing divides and the way social media and information is tearing apart what we see as collective truth and things like this. And so basically what I want to ask you with that sort of preamble is like information in general. Like, what are your feelings or concerns about how we continue to communicate and connect with one another? You're someone who started Evolver. You were thinking about like social media and connection, but it seems like it hasn't really, all these things haven't worked very well. And we're going down this morass of silos or tribalism. And it's something, it seems to be fed by us like curating our own truths. And that's built off of information that maybe isn't completely accurate anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what are your, I know you've written and thought a lot about, because that bleeds into things like sort of where the spiritual world is now. And we've got like things sort of like RFK or the whole COVID information. And we've got, it's sort of split in a sense. It started to change. And it used to just feel like there was more about hope and change, but now it's meeting against like whether we can even agree on what there is to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lot. There's many comments impacted in that one comment you just made.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I feel that it's a disaster. I agree with you. There was a sort of hope and an enthusiasm, and things seem to be in a much worse state in a lot of ways. Like the possibility of something sort of coherent coming together as a sort of antidote or alternative or opposition or whatever. Right now, I'm actually reading and writing about this book by this guy, Jem Bendell, who wrote this paper, Deep Adaptation, a number of years ago. He has a new book out, which is available for free, called Breaking Together. And, he's looking at the climate emergency and how we're basically already in a state of collapse in contemporary civilization, and how that's just going to get deeper and take more unpredictable forms in the future. And, his analysis, which is very similar to my analysis that I made in 2012 and How Soon Is Now and so on, is that one of the main things that's driving us towards this, universal meltdown is the money system. We're in this I think he talks about imperial modernism, kind of capitalist industrial death machine, and it only values money, So ultimately, you're kind of screwed. Like, all these alternatives that have needed to scale haven't been able to scale. Whereas, the Koch brothers, like, there's a book called Dark Money about how the Koch brothers decided back in the mid '60s or early '60s that they didn't like, the direction of American society towards more public education and more social services and healthcare and civil liberties and women's rights and the civil black movement. And so but they realized that there was a lot of momentum in its favor. So they were like, okay, what do we do? Let's approach this like corporate raiders. They got together and they put together a fund of billions of dollars. And over the next 30 years, they strategically had the capacity to influence society in the direction they chose. So they funded academic think tanks like the Heritage Foundation. They bought economics departments kind of University of Chicago, and installed kind of more Milton Friedman type characters there. They funded intellectuals like Charles Murray, who wrote The Bell Curve, which basically sought to show that certain minorities have lesser IQ. With the sort of underlying idea that therefore there isn't really a need to give them social services like education, because they're not going to really benefit anyway. They're not really going to be good for society anyway.
Wow.
So, they had billions of dollars over 30 or 40 years, working with the oil companies who also have billions of dollars for disinformation. Basically, from my perspective, the collapse of civil discourse, the falling into inane nitwit conspiracy theories, the total clusterfuck that is our situation, we can all trace it back to the distorting capacity of money and the centralization of wealth and power and the billionaire class, even those who, ostensibly are trying to do the good or whatever, it's usually locked up in a self-serving ideology, because it's like, if something has been very successful for you, then you kind of go along with it. I mean, we're all like, we're human, we're fragile, we're like stupid, I remember when I had a, decently paying job in magazines in New York, and I would, pass by homeless people on the streets. I would be like, God, just get up and get a job. I'd be wearing my Armani suit or whatever. But then when I, lost my job and I was on unemployment, I would give money to those same guys. I'd be like, oh, you poor guy, I get it. Life's tough. You can't get the right breaks, So, Bezos and Gates, unfortunately, have never had that other experience of, losing their job and being unemployed and realizing that, everybody's in the same boat together and so on. So, yeah. So, that's a lot of it. I mean, so you basically have this two-party system in America. Both parties are horrendous. The Democrats are the party of Wall Street money, and the Republicans are the party of some Wall Street money and a lot of fossil fuel money. Mm-hmm. The Democrats, I can say the Democrats are the party of a lot of Wall Street money and some fossil fuel money and tech money. That's basically, those are the ones who are controlling the discourse in society, and none of them are remotely able to address the actual desperate needs of what we need at this point, which is something like a mutual aid, UBI revolution, so that people can stop doing David Graeber talks about as the bullshit jobs, and actually deal with whatever we can do to prevent systemic ecological holocaust, which is what we're facing in the next decades.
Do you think that AI would help us to get out of some of those bullshit jobs, or is it more just going to create a wash of content that just basically breaks the internet, or it's like the last thing we need, or both?
I wrote about that. I've had the hope that, if AI was to eliminate a lot of white collar jobs, that would be fantastic, because, those would be people who could become kind of like, I mean, Antonio Negri and Michael Hart wrote this book Empire, where they tried to imagine like a new revolutionary subject and like a post-industrial, post-capitalist scenario like we're in now. And they had this idea that it would be the sort of software engineers, the hackers. They would be kind of like, but then that never really happened in the way they suggested. But yeah, if everybody working in software and a lot of people working in the law industry, and so on, if white collar workers get laid off in the hundreds of thousands, at a time of social and ecological dislocation, there's some chance for that having positive ramifications, although it also have a lot of negative ramifications.
I just never thought if AI was coming to being, it would come after the creative class. I just never, I didn't think the Jetsons would turn into like people could make music very easily, or that write copywriters or photo editors, these sorts of. It's surprising to me that that's a zone that it might take over. But certainly it seems to be like a concrescence of things coming together. And it's like you couldn't dream up a bigger collapse, whether it's just from technology to the ecological situation to the financial to the political and social. And in that sense, that is a lot to handle. I mean, what do you do to sort of deal with or combat a feeling of jadedness or despair?
Well, I don't have a feeling of jadedness or despair because I do have an esoteric worldview. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm not somebody who really has like regular practices. I mean, I've always had this bit of a problem where it's really hard for me to do anything that feels like inauthentic to like my being. And so, I grew up my parents were, bohemian artists and editors and painters in New York. And so, for me, my spiritual work, what feels most authentic to me is just the writing. But having said that, I mean, my perspective is kind of accords with, what I've been writing about recently, analytic idealism or monistic idealism, which to me is basically identical to what Vedanta talks about or Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, that essentially, we're all aspects of one unified field of consciousness, which underlies the illusion of space and time and matter and physicality. And that one consciousness is having a dream of its, discovering its own creative possibilities. It's exploring the many possible rooms in its infinite mansions and so on. So we're just that consciousness at play with itself. And so, it's in a way, there's no reason to get like super worried about, all this stuff, because that's just the way consciousness is.
It's like a natural rebalancing in a sense. It's just cause and effect, high pressure going to low pressure in a sense.
Well, it's just we're in a certain stage of, let's say, like a inevitable process. Like some people talk about the Kali Yuga and so on. Mm-hmm. So, like, humanity has like certain capacities. We have psychic and esoteric capacities, but we also have material capacities. So, at some point in the evolution of the human being, there was going to be a time when we hyper focused on the sort of material and the physical, completely negating the more what most cultures used to see as the more important part of what it is to be human, which is more like the the knowledge of the other worlds, the communion with the other worlds, the depth experiences of transcendence and so on. So there was going to come a time in human history where we explored these other capabilities, even though they're lesser important ones, and we just for whatever reason are living at that particular turn of the cycle.
Yeah. So what do you make of like the sort of psychedelic wave into mainstream culture that's happening now?
The disaster.
Yeah, tell me more about your feelings about that.
Well, I was always suspicious. I used to go to the Horizons conference, the MAPS conference.
I went to that first one, 2008. Remember, it was like
And I always felt like, compared to like in England, there was a conference called Breaking Convention. This guy David Luke put on, and that one like preserved the weird. I mean, Reality Sandwich you mentioned, like Reality Sandwich is kind of continuing, kind of like Terence McKenna, kind of like Robert Anton Wilson. Like, let's play with concepts. Let's be creative. Let's see how far we can go. And that was the spirit that I really delighted me about this whole psychedelic movement. this new psychedelic movement is a bunch of, as I can see, neoliberal entrepreneurial assholes who are basically creating, mild versions of psychedelic experience, so that they make other neoliberal entrepreneurs people feel cool, or give them kind of half experience. Like how many people I've met who tell me they've done iboga, and I'm like, oh, like how much did you do? They're like, and they tell me, and it's like, no, they didn't actually have an iboga experience. They had like an entrepreneur, neoliberal entrepreneur dose of a psychedelic experience. So yeah, from what I can see at this point, I mean, I was just looking at some ads. I've been starting to screenshot them from Instagram, like a company called Joyous, which is like doing ketamine infusion. And like one of their ads is like, yes, this commodities trader, he was he was the director of this commodities brokerage firm, and he was really unhappy and depressed, and he was alcoholic. And, now we've given him ketamine and he's like functioning in his work again. So it's like, for me, that's
making more money.
Yeah. And doing, things that shouldn't be done, for the benefit of people who don't deserve, So that seems to be what it's come down to is, basically, and I've written about this a lot. I mean, the way that, late stage capitalism works is it's like an infinitely absorptive, or tries to be infinitely absorptive, so like, Che Guevara comes out and poses like a challenge to, imperial modernity. So then he's ultimately converted to like hats and posters and films and, TV sitcoms and so on. So with psychedelics in the 60s, the neoliberal culture wasn't able to assimilate at that point. It was too dangerous. It was too threatening. It was, so it's like almost like, I'm really sad if I contributed to this project, because that wasn't really my plan at all. Over the last, like they had to suppress it, they couldn't even talk about it in medical schools, no value to these things whatsoever, Schedule 1, until they began to figure out how to kind of reassimilate it back into this, exploitational, destructive capitalist system. So now you have all these like finance bros. I mean, sure, it's much more fun to make your $600,000 salary on some psychedelic thing, than on, selling, I don't know, hotel chains, in Bermuda or something,
So I mean, I'm guessing then you have more of a dim view of like MAPS, taking it through the FDA and turning it into a pharmaceutical.
I'm really sad about MAPS. I think that maybe this whole, I mean, honestly, it's like, by the way, I'm having a bit of a journey with my anger right now.
Well, you know what, man? I appreciate it, and I also appreciate you just willing to be honest and open. And we all feel these things. I feel these things, right? We go from hope, and some days it's more anger, and just like it's fucked up.
Yeah,
it is.
Right now, I'm actually just enjoying giving a fuller expression. Maybe
please do. And I did, just to give you some, a setup, I did reach out to you and say like, hey, like, a lot of this movement in the spiritual world and psychedelic world, it needs some sharpening of the blade, because it needs sort of us like talking about and saying things about like not just like how it's all blossoming forward perfectly, because it's not.
Really, the whole thing makes me at this point sort of want to vomit. But so yeah, Doblin, who I really liked him personally, but I feel this this hyper medicalization approach to psychedelics. I understand why everyone got enthusiastic about that as a way to get it back into the public and the mainstream, but I don't think in the end it turned out to be a very good strategy, because it's like this was our last shot at a mystery, like an actual, like something that that goes beyond feel good panaceas, something that could actually transform people and reset them and decondition them and make them aware that these systems and structures we've created are like based on domination and control. And now it's actually being skillfully, seamlessly incorporated into that, with these incredible assholes like Christian Angermeyer and so on. And and Doblin has been the happy-faced kind of proponent for all this stuff. I sometimes, and unfortunately in life, sometimes the attempt to do the right thing ends up doing the wrong thing.
Do you think it's a both and though? Like, I mean, can the mystery be corralled or contained? In some sense, it's like these things do what they do. It's way beyond. It's like we're going to try and capitalize on it and make a mess of it, and that'll happen while maybe something is also pervading through society. I mean,
it could be, but I'm honestly, I'm actually seeing it, unfortunately, much more at this point of like, sadly, more like part of the disintegration process than something hopeful. I mean, I remember William Irwin Thompson, who's a cultural critic. I used to be really interested in. He's actually a fantastic writer. He talked about how, like, this was back in like the 60s, 70s, how like all of the unprotected psychedelic use back then was maybe eroding the boundary between the physical plane and the astral world in some way, and allowing, kind of like astral entities into our plane. And of course, that's something that, nobody in this like quote unquote scientific based, entheogenic, movement is like talking about, astral entities or, levels of spiritual beings or Ahrimanic and Luciferic beings. I mean, I was only one of the only people who's really, talking about that, in the mainstream of this movement. And, I think that there might be some real legitimacy to that. I mean, I feel like, I've talked to ayahuasca shamans who like say that it's like really hard for them to work on people who go to Burning Man because they're just like coated in all of these entities that have to be pulled off of them.
I take it you're not going to the burn in a few days.
I'm not going to go this year. I mean, I would go back. In a way, I feel I'm making a tactical error because my main reason to go had nothing to do. As I got older, had everything to do with just trying to connect people. Like I got to speak at like Sergey Brin's birthday or dinner party there once or whatever. So it was like, it seemed like if you're trying to sound the alarm about kind of what's happening, you at least had a sector of the elite there who were seemed quite receptive. Although at this point, as I said, going through this little moment of burst of anger. Bendel in his book talks about his experiences with Davos, and I find in a way maybe that was just like ultimately the corollary with what I experienced with Burning Man. Like people might be interested in the moment, but really what they're interested is most people mostly just interested in their own like self-serving agendas. Because people who are in the elites of the financial and tech world are taught how to function in a way that supports those principles and that agenda.
So it's almost like they cannibalize you and your ideas as opposed to being transformed. Like it almost could do more harm than good.
Yeah, maybe.
There's also this, of course, the economy of scale, which is part of our fundamental sickness. So that if you go and you're influencing the influencers in a sense, the people of power, that's the way we affect change, as opposed to that it's much more mysterious than that. Like petting a cat matters as much as something that reaches millions of people. And I know that isn't how the brain works, but that's more of like a spiritual psychedelic idea that sometimes we feel, where it's like maybe where our attempts are, it's like we're trying to change a broken system by working within a system. I think about like maps, trying to do it that way. Or we're all kind of doing that, right? I mean, even doing like podcasts or trying to publish inside, the systems, how we consume media now. It's very difficult not to be consumed by the thing that's eating us alive.
Yeah.
It's wild. So tell me a bit about, I was interested in your thoughts on Conspirituality, the podcast book. I think it's a book now.
Mm-hmm.
And then our friend Charles Eisenstein, and they're sort of pitting these two, sort of polarities in a sense against each other. I've always thought that the criticism to sort of what happened in the last few years, particularly in the spiritual world, is valid. But I also found like those guys so incredibly snarky, and it's so difficult to like why do they have to go so far? It's like, why does it have to just be like this us versus them? We're so much better, holier than thou type energy.
Totally.
And I'm just like, Jesus, where's the goddamn middle anymore? Say like ambiguity or like I don't know, and I think that's okay. Especially with like COVID, to be like, look, I don't know. But I'm going to make some educated choices here and there. Those are going to shift at times, and I'm making calculated choices. And everyone wants to just pick a side and say, we know, and it's just getting worse and worse.
Getting worse and worse. I agree with you.
I want to talk about the spiritual world and how we've started to go into these edges. and also like those valid criticisms that need to be spoken to, but also like it's not about throwing the baby out the bathwater.
Yeah. I mean, those guys are like that kind of energy you have when you had like a faith and you felt betrayed by your faith. You're like an apostate or something. So,
Yeah, that's a
in the
good
book,
example.
they talk about how like they were doing all the like the fasts and the apple cider, vinegar cleanse, and like, green poop would come out of their butts after like 5 days. But now they think that was just like the apple residue. And they look at all the kind of, they look at all kind
Maybe
of
it was. I don't know.
exactly. Well, that's the thing. They're like, where's the actual evidence that any of this stuff is like really, really valid or actually helps you on any deep level? So I think they're performing at this point an extremely useful function in it could be done nicer and better and with more nuance and ambiguity.
More effective, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's pretty effective. I mean, in terms of, I guess like, this whole COVID thing definitely has been created like a huge psychological rift around how people relate to establishment and authority, and what they trust as evidence and science. And I still haven't figured it out, like reconciled it entirely. I still toggle around.
Me too.
Yeah. I mean, I ultimately got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I didn't get a booster. I think that was the best. I'm still happy with my decision. But of course, those vaccines were taken off the market for causing, heart problems in a small group of the population. I look at all this, I sort of stopped looking at it now, but, there's a huge industry of alternative bloggers and YouTubers who are saying that, all around the world, there are still highly elevated death rates of unexplained causes, and it's most likely due to it's definitely due to the COVID vaccine. And, and then you have other people, saying, who are virologists or vaccinologists who are saying, look, this, it wasn't perfect, but it helped a lot of people. And then I have friends who didn't get vaccinated, who ultimately got very bad cases, even if they were young and healthy, they were really like, down and out for quite a while with the virus. So, I think the part of the problem was obviously the way it was forced on everybody.
Sure.
The mentality around it, in the sense that it was treating everybody like an idiot,
and shutting down dissent. That's not good.
But on the other hand, I mean, that is kind of like the history. If you look at the history of like how, human societies deal with, viruses and so on, it used to be that everybody would just get the vaccine if it was like, I can't even remember what they were now, but polio. I mean, it wouldn't be like, you wouldn't like question the vaccine in a way.
Yeah.
But I mean, on the other hand, there's an atrophying of faith in the wonders of modern medicine and in the establishment, and there's good reasons for that. If you look at the pharmaceutical companies and what they've put out into the world, and how every corporation ultimately behaves the same way, right? Because like their fealty is ultimately to their bottom line, and whatever else is at play, there's no reason to trust any company that it's ultimately going to be for anybody else's good ultimately. So you have like the tobacco companies, which for years, for decades, hid all the totally significant evidence that smoking was causing like horrible health conditions. Obviously, the fossil fuel companies. Like that's another interesting facet, is this kind of overlap between kind of anthropogenic climate change deniers and vaccine skeptics, which I'm sympathetic with vaccine skeptics and toggle around on that issue, but I don't think I think the evidence is overwhelming in terms of the climate emergency, and that it's caused by the human, putting out so much CO2 in the atmosphere. So I'm kind of, that's a little bit of a mindfuck. Something like Matthias Desmet, who wrote Transformation or whatever, like this idea that it's like sort of this mass fascism, of kind of like indoctrination. Yet he also turns out to be pretty much a climate change denier. So then that messes my head up, because for me that doesn't make any sense.
it seems like we have to be able to hold ambiguity or concurrent ideas at the same time, and we're struggling with that. Like,
We don't have to do anything. We could completely go insane and just lose our shit. Like that all.
well, it seems like it's a necessary like balm for us to be able to say like a bit of I don't know and a bit of I think this and a bit of like, because it is destroying us. It really is. But I personally believe that social media and that whole zone changed things dramatically since that came on the scene.
Yeah.
And like you look at something like COVID, and just on the face of it, I kind of thought when it first started, it's like, oh, well, this is a perfect medicine to bring the world together because it will touch everyone. It doesn't matter your economic status, and that would be a unifier. And we missed that opportunity. I mean, it became a big divider, but I think a lot of that had to do with like sort of the silos we would get into with information, which is largely driven by social media. And so, I mean, there is a bit of a technological problem of how we're like hacking our own brains without being fully aware of what we're doing.
But it goes back once again to the money problem. I mean, for me, like that was like when we were, when I started Evolver, Facebook, wasn't the monolith that it is today, and I completely believe that you could have a social media platform that was kind of designed to raise collective intelligence. That every proposition that was made, had to be backed up, or at least fully expressed. You could have like logic trees, but because Facebook and these other platforms were built to maximize engagement and to control algorithms and all that stuff, they were not made in the public good. They were made in the public bad. And so that's these could have been the most incredible tools for humanity to come together. And in theory, the internet could still be that, but but there again, it's the money problem, because it's like you have billionaires would be lining up to do anything where they can say, okay, this is going to make a lot of money off of advertising, and you're able to control the population's worldview and so on. But if you say, no, this is actually going to liberate humanity, this is going to make people far more intelligent, more aware of their environment, more connected with each other, then you can't raise 50 cents.
Yeah, we're manipulating. We're hacking our brains for like the cheapest thrills, which is probably around anger and rage.
Yeah,
we're not
manipulating our brains. But that's where I also get really annoyed at Charles, for instance. Like, he always has this we all the time. No, there actually are, super wealthy people who are, psychopaths by nature, who are manipulating these things for their benefit,
I guess when I say we, I mean people who choosing the collective. I'm not on social media in that way at all, but I still have accounts which I feel conflicted about, But I guess we can all choose how much we interface with it. But you're right; it's extremely intentional.
Yeah, I mean, it's and that's also where I thought, when I agree with Ben Dell's book, it's intentional, but not in the way that the sort of conspiracy porn is imagines the intention. It's intentional in the way it's like the operative logic of a system, and the only way we can really fully grok what's being done to us is to think of it on a systems level, which then also obviously leads to the thinking about what other system is possible. Like, how could you undo all of this with a different system?
So with that thinking, like, greed is a motivator as opposed to like a cabal sitting around in some secret cave making plans, for the next 1,000 years.
Exactly.
It's like greed can be enough, and sort of natural tendencies of systems. That's kind of how I looked at a lot of what was going down with COVID. Like, look, I can understand how a government's like actually sitting around someone's trying to do their job in some department. Like, how do we convince people to do? Okay, we got to keep it simple. Like, we're just we got to push away this other information, and we got to push them towards the vaccine.
Yeah. I mean, in that case, when I wrote about this, but we do know that, like, Bill Gates, who put billions of dollars of philanthrocapitalism money into the pharmaceutical complex, organized a number of events, like Event 21, I think one was called,
Yeah.
but where he had people from the WHO and these different governments and so on, fully rehearsing what they would say, how they would handle the messaging, how they would handle dissent, in the event of something like and some of these were actually very close to exactly what happened. So they even in terms of describing like a certain type of coronavirus, maybe it was like a horseshoe crab or something, so like they were completely, and that's why it had this sound, this sort of tinny sound to it of like a rehearsed nonsense, because it actually was. Gates had paid for his people to because people are too stupid from somebody like that's perspective to handle the truth. So how do you manage information on their behalf? And that's also why you end up with people enraged, against technocracy, for good reason.
Yeah, it's definitely true. That also feeds into a lot of people's thinking that it's like, anything from like a lab leak can be like, that makes a lot of sense, versus like someone made this and put it out intentionally to make this power grab. It's like, I suppose that's possible, but that seems like more of a reach. It's just some of this is a bit of Occam's razor of just like.
Yeah. I guess where I worked my way around to was that essentially what happened is that there was like a Geneva Convention, so bioweapons weren't allowed to be researched anymore. But essentially, the military-industrial complex found a way around it, which was called gain of function. Mm-hmm. So, and somehow in this case, they were actually doing it, with our, theoretical adversary, China. So that we were doing this sort of, gain of function research with China in these facilities. And we know for a fact that kind of like the biosecurity at the facilities was very weak. Was that intentional, semi-intentional? Was there a faction who were like kind of totally cool with this getting out because it allowed for, more control? It allowed for the pharmaceutical companies who'd been trying to sell this mRNA stuff for decades and nobody wanted it. Did it give them a free hand suddenly to, because it's also, it's all about new markets, right? Like, psychedelics is like a new market. Like capitalism, needs to continually expand, which means that it needs to continually create new markets. And it almost doesn't even matter, what you can say they're healing or you can say they're evil, like crypto. New market, expansive new market for capitalism. It turns out it actually doesn't do anything useful or helpful, but it's a wild ride while you're in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think is counterculture these days, or is there a counterculture?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, art and culture seem to be in a weird limbo state. I mean, I think that has to do with the collapse of the paradigm. Because it's like, traditional art and culture, counterculture or not, is basically always about sort of romantic focus on the individual as this heroic figure. Whether they're going through their relationship struggles, in rom-coms, or, whether they're saving the universe in superhero films. But like all of that, I think, is just beginning to feel very like tawdry and kind of like uncomfortable. And, what would be more like, I don't know, and also just this purely secular culture is also just feeling kind of, to me anyway, like a little bit like it's just repeating nonsense, And so like, in terms of art, people have already put, a can of shit in a gallery and called it art. Manzoni did that, or, they've already crucified themselves to a roof of a Volkswagen and been shot, Chris, whatever his name is, did that. So, those types of avant-garde gestures don't mean anything anymore. You're just repeating. It's like it's an academic exercise. Pop art has been done. We get it. People still make money on that stuff, but basically it's a totally academic exercise. Ooh, somebody's at my door. That might be my daughter. That's cool. I mean, yeah, this sort of deconstruction of sexuality that's happening. gender roles and ideas and so on. So that's sort of interesting as one.
Well, for a lot of teenagers, that is punk rock. That's sort of the
Yeah,
counterculture.
it is. And,
is just saying fuck you to gender and all the systems in that way, and it's cool.
I think that is interesting development, and what else is counterculture? Yeah, I don't know.
Well, in that vein, what do you think it means to be an activist today, or what are mechanisms that can be done?
And I saw my friend. Ever heard of Reverend Billy?
Yeah, I remember Reverend Billy.
The Church of Stop Shopping.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, he does. He's a great rabble rouser. He speaks at like Extinction Rebellion events and all stuff. And he was like, and I was like, I've been trying to convince him because he has this space near me here in Manhattan for at least some months, that maybe we could try to do something like organize kind of like a mutual aid network if I take Jem Bendel's book seriously, we're it always seems like there's a little more resilience in the system than we predict, but we could be 3 to 5 years away from even in these more developed societies, like the US and Europe, things are going to get a lot more difficult. Like food and water and energy are all going to become more intermittent, for people who don't have a lot of resources and so on. So this would be an incredible time which is exactly what I was trying to do with Evolver, but I couldn't get the funding together. And then people kind of turned on me in various ways, that I fucked up in various ways. But, we're trying to create like a network of local communities. So you could, that idea of creating a sort of centers of local resilience, outside of the dominant system, that hopefully could be like networked together in in some bioregional or even planetary kind of framework. That would seem to be a very productive path.
Yeah, it's funny because like the Mormons, this has been done for a while by a lot of certain religions, and it's like. But it is a lot about Jehovah's Witness, I believe. Also, things like that.
Totally. Well, yeah. And that's like, I guess that's also something I think a lot about and have written about. Is kind of like, talking about this analytic idealism or monistic idealism concept. Is there the possibility for something like a new religious structure to emerge, like a religion beyond religion, that's actually based on logic and kind of
sounds Vulcan.
What's that?
I said it sounds Vulcan to me.
Vulcan. Interesting. Vulcan. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Very Spock-esque. Yeah.
I have to look into the Vulcan religion. I didn't remember what that was. But yeah, maybe that's.
Do you think that the derivation of what we're going through is a spiritual crisis?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, yeah, we're in a culture that got separated from kind of ideas of there being, transcendence, something of value beyond kind of, materialist consumptive patterns. What I've been thinking about more and more recently, I've always been very interested in the for many years, the psychic, because I had many like profound, like occult, psychic, paranormal kind of experiences.
Yeah.
Which once again are not something that are being discussed, as far as I can see it in this, big psychedelic renaissance. Well, but it seems like there's something of kind of specific and particular local knowledge, Rupert Sheldrake's ideas of like morphic resonance, morphogenetic fields, like the Kogi are able to do this like divination with like water, or I've been in enough of these indigenous scenarios, where within their language and semantic structure and thousands of years of heritage, they experience magic, we consider magic, which is outside of the laws of our belief structures on a regular basis without even thinking about it. Tibetan Buddhists, the same, Like for them, reincarnation, is not even like a question. It's like, yeah, of course. Like I talked to this Lama who was like, yeah, his father was a big Lama and his father passed away. And he was like, yeah, when my dad died, he achieved the rainbow body, which is where the body shrinks
Yeah.
and is sort of assimilated back into the spirit realm. And he said, yeah, my dad was like, basically in nirvana, and he didn't want to come back and incarnate as a human anymore. And finally, he was like, yeah, I had to go talk to my dad in the world of the spirits. And I was like, Dad, look, I really need you. I miss you. Like things are really difficult here. I need your support right now. So my dad was like, okay. So he said, and then he looked at me, he's like, yeah, now my dad is a 6-year-old boy living in Bhutan, And I completely think that that's correct. I think that that is the case. Like not in a metaphorical way, not in like a folktale way. I think there are, these cultures that have these profound esoteric knowledge systems have it's like created its own sort of like morphogenetic field, its own kind of quantum field of potentiality that is just as real as anything else. So, we also have that capacity. We would have to draw from our own storehouse of symbols and knowledge and so on, which is why I just did this course on the Hermetic tradition, because I think we actually need at this point to go back into the Western Hermetic tradition as the seeds of a European response, because it's been like in the sort of new age, post new age, like spiritual culture, there's been a kind of rejection of the Western European kind of background in favor of indigenous shamanism and Eastern mysticism and so on, because we're really like, it's hard for us to stomach like Christianity, like most of us who've grown up in these kind of systems.
Is that sort of part of the anecdote, if you think that's needed, part of the recipe for the spiritual world right now, is maybe bringing in a bit of hermeticism? Or is it more of like, you also talked about galaxy brain, is that part of the sickness of like being too general and not trying to get into specifics? Or what would you think?
I mean, I'm kind of a galaxy brain, so I was kind of attacking myself with that thing. But yeah, I guess I think. I mean, I don't know if a solution, is possible. Like, I think sometimes our hope for a solution, we're going to resolve this, maybe that even.
Well, sorry, let me reframe it then. Not like what's the solution, like a critique for sort of the community of spirituality as we find ourselves in modern times. It's more, a direction or things we had. Hey, you should guys, we should be paying attention to
the main critique I have is that it's there's a lack of social and systemic critique in the spiritual world, and so it's all about like the individual. It's like, which allows it to be very easily packageable for the sort of neoliberal entrepreneurship culture, which is
back to money.
Understandable, because that's also where everybody gets paid, right? Like like I feel like if I go to Instagram, all my friends are like spiritual coaches or tantric coaches trying to help people get better orgasms or whatever. But it's like doesn't really have anything to do with I don't know, kind of like a deeper level of something. I mean, yeah, it's like. And I remember, years ago when Occupy Wall Street was going on, and, I would hang out with the ayahuasca community or the yoga community, like Chief Mukta Yoga, and then I would go and hang out with these kids who were getting their heads bashed in, by the police and living on McDonald's fries because they felt that the, system was really unjust and had to change. And I really, felt that they were much more deeply spiritual in their ethos, even if they were Marxists in a way, because it's like they actually really cared about other people and saw the other as themselves, and saw that we were all in this together. And what I see more in like Burning Man and Ibiza and so on is more this ethos of like, if you're part of my tribe or my sort of spiritual country club in a way, then I care about you and so on. But otherwise, there isn't that universal idea that everybody has value just for being human, equal value.
It is a bit more in camps, isn't it, as far as acceptance and sort of affirmation of like we're affirming each other, and those that don't, we don't really want to hear their point of view as much because they're wrong, or they don't understand. I mean, it happened a lot with COVID, right? Instead of it being like maybe, people won't even be friends now with people who have those different beliefs. It became very difficult. Or political differences now. It's not even like, it's like you're crazy. Like you're in a different reality. Oh, you're that kind of person.
Well, yeah. People have to learn to discern between kind of thoughts and feelings in a way. Like, you might want to believe something, but what's the evidence for that belief? It's maybe ironic that I'm saying that because people would often think that, my beliefs were very woolly and ungrounded, but actually I'm very skeptical, and anything that I ended up believing to be the case was only after sort of rigorous inspection, my own experiences and different ways to understand them and so on.
Well, your writing in the last year or so, I've appreciated your self-critique and skepticism and that ambiguity. That's actually what's really been drawing me to it. It's because it's like, I know it's affirming my own beliefs, but my own belief of saying like, I'm not quite sure and I don't always know. And I actually do have maybe regrets about some things I believed in the past, or it's like, but I also have compassion for myself and wondering, like you said something about the role you played in the psychedelic unfolding. What is that regret you perhaps have?
Well, one thing that happened was I had my own Me Too moment where I made a public admission of having made mistakes in my, sexual life when I became sort of famous and was something like the Timothy Leary of the psychedelic world or whatever. And that got me so I regret how I behaved and also, that was costly in terms of my own career, but also personally, and I'm sorry if I hurt anybody and so on. So there is that, and then I guess that's the main thing, frankly, because otherwise I feel like I was kind of holding a good space for. When I did the Evolver project, like Reality Sandwich and so on, I didn't even create my own website. I wasn't trying to push myself forward, and still people were very much many people were very felt like that they didn't want to help the project because they would be helping me or something. But meanwhile, for me, it was a very selfless thing. It was more something like this needs to emerge. A movement, needs to happen. And at that point, I had a best-selling book, and I could have, definitely used my power just to increase my own, money base or whatever. But instead, I had a very principled idea that no, there's without a movement around this sort of consciousness stuff, we're not going to be able to make a difference. It's I could write 20 books on my own, but if 1,000 people write books and 20,000 people become leaders in a network of communities, then we could actually make a difference. Yeah.
The spores were great. The community gatherings, I really enjoyed those. Just an excuse to get together with people and meet people and have potlucks and talk about weird things. I miss that.
Yeah, I still almost every day, try to think about some way to get something like that started again.
That was the best part.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But imagine if that had grown. If we'd been able to raise some money, or if we figured then suddenly when that was 2008, 2009. So when 2016 happened, you would have actually had in a lot of communities forums where people could talk about why they're supporting Trump. We could have created a totally different culture where people, were able to listen to each other better,
Yeah. Well, we're running short on time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you what you make of this potential pseudo-alien disclosure going on through the government and what you think about it.
it feels really funky. It feels fraudulent.
Isn't it weird? You know
Yeah.
what's weird? It's like guys like Stephen Greer all this time. You're like, come on, it can't possibly be like he was. There's something accurate there about like he's got the people and Tom DeLonge, and it just doesn't completely add up to me.
Yeah. But I mean,
Or
well, I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, I wrote a lot about the crop circles and different ways of looking at the UFO and alien abduction phenomenon in the 2012 book, and then I wrote another little book called The Occult Control System, which kind of like took that a little bit further. So, I mean, um, I think there is a real phenomenon that communicates with us. Whether it's, so if there's ultimately only one consciousness that, is quantum and space-time is an illusion, then all sorts of things could be happening that are a little outside of our semantic structures and understanding. So something like that is what feels to me that is going on. In this particular, I mean, and also I looked at it in the 2012 book. I looked at the sort of alien abduction saga and this idea that actually there might be some kind of malevolent other that is seeking to, that is also an aspect of ourselves, that is somehow seeking to use the gaps in our understanding and our kind of materialist hubris against us to kind of insert themselves into our reality. So I sort of have felt that that's kind of what the Gray saga is, actually. It's like they're almost like a form of like, I mean, in the 2012 book, I described those as like bacteria on the level of consciousness or something. It's like something's going on that, there may be a larger reveal at some point, although there may not be, because I mean, one of my favorite commentators on this type of stuff is this writer, Patrick Harper. And he talks about it as, the not demonic, but daimonic, the sort of trickster reality. And that it, continually plays with our sense of like certainty and never fully comes forward to like a total reveal. So it's always on this like perimeter or periphery of possibility. So that's something like that seems to be what's partially happening here.
yeah, playing with our certainty. If I had to think of like what is the kryptonite of today, that would be it. Because there's a lot of grasping for certainty, or praising, or putting science on a pedestal of saying like it has to be something that we can make into ones and zeros. Where you're talking about like things that are weird not being around so much, or even talked about or valued.
Yeah, I mean, as Nietzsche realized, like even this idea of cause and effect is just an idea of the human mind. That might actually be the case that the effect precedes the cause. Yeah, particularly if there are other dimensions of space-time. There could be something that has an organizing principle or form of organizing intelligence that is using our kind of limited 4D capacities to trick us, to kind of fuck with us in this reality.
Or the other side, that there's sort of some sort of natural unfolding, whether it's galactic or otherwise, and we're sort of bubbling into another dimensional space.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun to look at the different possible kind of articulations.
Yeah.
I think I also, although I didn't know about it when I wrote the 2012 book, there's this guy Sergio Magana, who was a Toltec trained Aztec Toltec shaman, who wrote a book called The Dawn of the Sixth Sun, which he says the Aztec calendars are just a little bit different than the Mayan, traditional Mayan, that it's like 2012 to 2021, or the transition from the fifth sun to the sixth sun. And the fifth sun, or the last 5,000 years, was a sun of light. So it was a time when like clarity, waking, daylight, consciousness was the prevailing tonality. And now we're moving into a sun of darkness. So it becomes a phase of more like the dream world, the unconscious, the psyche, the ambiguity. It's more murky. It's more ambiguous. I find that a very fascinating articulation because it seems to express something that seems true to me about the nature of this time that we're in.
How long is that supposed to last?
Another 5,000 years.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Blink of an eye in the cosmos.
Exactly.
Wait, so we only got 2 years of the light or something, and then we go straight into
No,
this?
no, we're already past that. We're already in the darkness.
Oh,
Yeah.
all right.
I mean, the darkness doesn't necessarily mean darkness as in evil or
Right.
dark. It means dark as in dreamlike, like a sort of the unconscious. Like, let me see if I can give you an example. Yeah, that should make sense.
Well, the darkness is also where everything comes out of. It's
Exactly.
a place of creation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So so things become more kind of dreamlike. And it does feel like that. I mean, in your dreams, you can think about something and suddenly you create that thing. Now with 3D printing and AI, we'll be like, I want to grow wings, and suddenly we'll grow these big wings and off we'll go,
Yeah. Thanks for dancing around and talking about lots of different things. I really appreciate it, man. What's something you're excited about, or if you would like to point people in a particular direction, where would you like them to go?
Well, I mean, I'm still excited about my own work. And so I would point people to the newsletter, danielpinchbeck.substack.com. If they haven't read the 2012 book, which I still think is very helpful for understanding what's going on, we just reissued it as Quetzalcoatl Returns, a slightly different title, got rid of the 2012 title. And other than that, I mean, I definitely found the Bendel's new book, which is available for free, Breaking Together, to be very good. And I'm a huge fan of Bernardo Kastrup, the monist idealist.
He was on the pod a few months ago.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, I think it's beyond great. It's extremely important because
it's complicated for some people to understand, his point, even though he keeps saying it. But why do you think it's important?
So I think that's really our biggest hope right now, to escape to whatever extent we can the total dissolution. We need to reject reductive materialism, and he does the best job I've seen of making that logically obvious.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Trevor. Good to see you.
Yeah, I'm going to stop this.
Or do you like to be called Krishna more?
Well, Krishna is a name I got from Ram Dass 5
nice.
or so years ago, so I'm quite used to it. So I'd say yes, I prefer that, but
Krishna.
I'm not
hard
militant.
to get used to somebody's name. And are you living in Utah still?
I have a place in southern Utah, and then this is Boise, Idaho, here with Radha, so Marissa was named Radha by Ram Dass. When I did the album with him, he gifted us with those names, and we sort of adopted them. And like I said, just gotten very used to it. And it's been a nice, a chance to just, I don't know, when someone calls you something else, it's a real chance to have a blank slate personally, internally.
That's
You're
nice.
just oh wait, maybe I can just drop my bullshit.
Yeah.
What can I be in this moment?
Yeah.
To other people, it almost means nothing. But to me, it was really powerful.
Amazing. Cool, man. Stay in touch.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you, Daniel, for coming on the show. Definitely check out his Substack if you get a chance. There's not much downside. It's a lot of really cool information. And I find it to be very titillating for the mind and good stuff. I'll put the link in the show notes right down there. This song that you're hearing in the background is called Patience, and it is one of the singles we have released already off the Music for the Deck of the Titanic album. It is out wherever you listen to music, and there is more coming soon. Another single in mid-September, and some more videos, and the entire record comes out right around that LA date, November 7th. If you want to grab a ticket to that or tell a friend, invite a friend, get one now before anything sells out, eastforest.org/tour. Thank you again to everyone on our Patreon, patreon.com/eastforest. And y'all just keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do it with grace.
So
all our gumption, eyes into the sun. All our lives to disguise, working counterclockwise. Catch it all before it drops. Lay it down before our time stops. Right here, right here, right here, right here. Intertwined, so sublime, in real time. We're not alone, the seeds are sown, it's a sign. Begin, begin in your mind.